Hey everyone, welcome to the webinar tonight. So tonight's presenter is Lauren Broccoli. She is the Assistant Director of Government Relations for the AVMA. Lauren worked on political campaigns as an aide on Capitol Hill and as a lobbyist for several public and private universities before joining the AVMA Government Relations Division. Her educational background is in communications and law. The moderator tonight is her colleague, Alex Sands, also an Assistant Director of Government Relations for the AVMA. She's going to go ahead and get started today. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be with you, and thanks to Ashley, Leah, and SAVMA for inviting me to discuss One Health Advocacy and AVMA's federal legislative efforts that advance One Health. For tonight's presentation, we're going to do an overview of the AVMA GRD, talk a little bit about what is advocacy, our One Health Advocacy Toolkit, dive into AVMA's federal One Health agenda, talk about what you can do, how can you get involved, and then we'll have questions and answers and a little interactive poll at the end. Just a brief flag that go ahead and submit any questions you may have throughout the presentation in the chat feature so we can dive right in on discussing them at the end of the presentation. So beginning with an overview of the AVMA GRD, that's the Government Relations Division. It's based in Washington, D.C. So the GRD is a full-time staff focused exclusively on advocacy for the veterinary profession. The federal relations team, as you can see here, focuses on Congress and the executive branch, as well as the judicial branch. And we're responsible for the political action committee, grassroots and grass tops, including the ambassador program and the Congressional Advocacy Network. We'll spend some time talking a little bit about each of those through the presentation, as well as the activities that we participate in, right? So promoting our federal legislative and regulatory priorities, that these are approved by the AVMA Board of Directors, monitoring legislative developments, providing updates to our members on federal activities, educating congressional offices and federal agencies on our priorities, and liaisoning with strategic partners, stakeholders, and members of Congress. We also have a state relations team within the Government Relations Division, monitoring legislation, regulation in all 50 states, and providing expertise and support to state DMAs. For the purposes of this presentation, we're just going to focus on our federal efforts. So let's start with the basic. What is advocacy? And why is it so important to key priorities of veterinary medicine, like the one we're discussing tonight, which is One Health? So advocacy is being a voice for you and for every member of the veterinary profession. It's ensuring that lawmakers are making decisions on federal policy and they know how the policy will impact the veterinary profession. And so we do that by developing relationships with members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, as well as key allies to advance our priorities, protect the profession, and impact the legislative process. So we all know on this webinar, right, One Health is a multifaceted concept, right? It's nuanced. It's something that veterinarians work at the interface of on a daily basis. However, right, lawmakers do not immediately make this connection that animal health, public health, and the environment are all connected. So it's on us. It's why the AVMA GRD has a comprehensive One Health advocacy agenda, because it's really more than one piece of legislation. It has to be this constant and continuous advocacy to advance the role of veterinary medicine in One Health and really have an impact. And my final note there is that this will be really important, and we'll talk a little bit through the presentation on this constant and continuous advocacy, particularly as we're entering the end of the current Congress and looking ahead to a new Congress when there's going to be new members elected into Congress. So advocacy will be key to ensuring the voice of the veterinary profession is heard to those new members and to those returning. So how do we do advocacy, right? What are the tools that we use to advance this comprehensive One Health legislative agenda? So the first, as I mentioned, right, we have this team, full-time team of government relations professionals that are based in Washington, D.C. Again, we are this full-time presence that is working to advance AVMA's One Health priorities and other priorities that are important to the veterinary profession. Additionally, AVMA participates in joint advocacy efforts with groups like AVMC that are within the veterinary profession and the realm, as well as those outside, such as producer groups, right, like the National Pork Producers. And we're engaging with them in these joint advocacy efforts through coalitions and stakeholder partnerships. So this is all about power in numbers, right? You're getting as many groups that each represent thousands, hundreds of constituents across the country to carry the same message on One Health and to urge lawmakers to act on it. One of the key groups that AVMA participates in is with an ad hoc coalition with the One Health Commission, and to help advance our One Health agenda. You may be aware of it, but the One Health Commission is a nonprofit organization that's focused exclusively on educating and advancing One Health. It's a great resource and you should check it out. The other thing that we leverage is a Congressional Veterinary Medicine Caucus. So basically, this is a congressional club, if you will. It allows members of the House of Representatives to join and demonstrate their support, their interest, their prioritization of veterinary medicine. Currently, we have 3 members that are veterinarians serving in Congress, and they lead this collection, this club of lawmakers, if you will, about roughly 30 to 40 members. And we're utilizing this group to inform, educate, and mobilize on our One Health priorities. Because all politics are local, right, one of the most effective tools we have to advance our One Health agenda, as well as our other priorities, is our members of AVMA, right? So representing 95,000 members across the country, that makes a huge impact when we're talking of members of Congress. That's a lot of people, right? And so the best tool we have for this grassroots mobilization of our members is called the Congressional Action Network. This gives participants who subscribe the tools to speak up on issues that impact veterinarians, like One Health, at the right time politically and when it would be most effective to weigh in with members of Congress. The CAN assists AVM members in connecting to his or her representative or senator to communicate a specific message at a specific time on a specific piece of legislation. This is really important, and one of the big takeaways from this presentation tonight is if you haven't already, you should definitely sign up for the CAN and receive timely alerts. It's one of the best ways that you can help us be more effective on the One Health Act, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and on other issues of importance to veterinary medicine. Additionally, our other program we have that helps AVMA leaders develop more personal relationships with lawmakers is called the Ambassador Program. So this is about identifying those leaders, as I mentioned, and helping them develop a more personal connection, a more enhanced relationship with their representative senator. This could be through a tour of their animal hospital or clinic. Maybe it's attending an event in the district. It's really because all politics are local that having these AVMA leaders carry the message directly as a constituent to his or her member of Congress has a huge impact. And we've leveraged this on our One Health priorities. Fly-in or Hill Days, you probably heard this throughout your time in participating in SAVMA, but they're organized each year and they allow our members to visit with his or her lawmakers and highlight legislative priorities. This is another great example of the power of grassroots. This past year's fly-in actually focused on 2 One Health priorities we have, both the One Health Act and then funding for the National Animal Health Laboratory Network. This was a tremendous success, and many lawmakers co-sponsored the One Health Act after meeting their constituents, so it has a really big impact. AVMA offers GRD externships. There's something you can find out about on our website. Again, this helps us develop the amount of advocates we have that are talking about One Health priorities and go on to have roles maybe within Washington, D.C. or elsewhere to carry that message. It's a very effective tool. And finally, AVMA's Political Action Committee, or PAC. So this is a critical tool to helping us build meaningful bipartisan congressional champions that help us advance One Health and other priorities within veterinary medicine. So one example of how important the PAC has been as a tool to advancing advocacy is that throughout quarantine, Capitol Hill has actually been closed to lobbyists and visitors. And so the PAC has allowed the AVMA GRD and ambassadors as well to maintain these interactions with members of Congress that have been so critical, and helping us to highlight the priorities related to One Health. And we'll talk a little bit about this, but this has been funding for animal health infrastructure in light of COVID-19, but other priorities we had as well in small business world. So we'll spend some more time in a bit discussing the PAC, but that's just a quick snapshot of the tools we use to advance One Health. So now let's spend some time talking about AVMA's federal One Health agenda. And I want to stress that this is really comprehensive and multifaceted, because much like the concept of One Health, as you all know, there's not a one-size-fits-all piece of legislation, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about the series of legislated efforts that AVMA GRD advocates on to advance the role of veterinary medicine, and One Health. So one of our top priorities for this Congress has been the One Health Act. The full title is this Advancing Emergency Preparedness Through One Health of 2019. So think about federal bureaucracy, both in the federal agencies, so the agencies that have to carry out programs, initiatives, and all of the people that work there to address, right, and act on issues related to animal, environmental, public health. But also think about federal bureaucracy as the fact that Congress is also made up by congressional committees that have oversight of specific issues. I guess what I'm trying to paint the picture for you all is much like a university, right, or College of Veterinary Medicine, people tend to be siloed, right, away from maybe the public health arm or the medical school, right? And so One Health remains a major challenge for federal bureaucracy. So this bill is directing USDA and Health and Human Services to come together, right, coordinate against every other federal agency that touches on One Health and develop a plan, put together a framework that you could come back to Congress and demonstrate that this is going to help create a federal One Health program, and that would include research goals and a strategic plan. So it's all about breaking down the silos that exist at the federal government and ensuring and directing that the federal government is taking a One Health approach. So the One Health Act, as I noted here, it's bipartisan, bicameral legislation, right? So we have a House version and a Senate version, and we have both sides of the aisle that are supporting this. You know, in light of COVID-19, One Health and its connection to public health has become a very hot topic for lawmakers. And so in light of this, we've had a lot renewed momentum on the legislation. AVMA works closely with the One Health Commission I mentioned before, AVMC, and other stakeholder groups to continue to drive support for this bill. And in fact, right now, if you sign up for the CAN, there is an alert right now to encourage members of Congress to become co-sponsors. And so as we look ahead for the next month or two, right, after the election, we'll enter a lame duck session of Congress. And we're gonna focus our efforts on pushing this bill, this bipartisan, bicameral bill, over the finish line. And in a little bit, we'll talk about how you can help us do that, but I'm already previewing it with the fact that there's this CAN alert, so it'd be helpful to take a look at that so you can weigh in with your elected officials on the importance of the bill. Additionally, within this One Health agenda, federal research, skipped one slide, the animal health infrastructure is one of our key priorities. So AVMA GRD advocates to ensure Congress provides robust funding for surveillance, diagnostics, and countermeasures, collectively what we refer to as animal health infrastructure, that protect against foreign animal diseases and safeguard public health and food safety. Some of you may be familiar with these facilities and laboratories and programs, and we're advocating for all of these through the annual funding or appropriations process each year. So that's when Congress decides and determines funding levels for all the different federal agencies and programs. So our advocacy efforts to advance the animal health infrastructure includes meeting with our congressional champions and those lawmakers that sit on the appropriations committee, so those that have oversight of funding. And we're educating them on the impact these programs have on advancing One Health. They're really critical, right? And to our ability to have this major component of a federally coordinated One Health approach. So as I mentioned before, right, the National Animal Health Laboratory Network was actually one of the topics of our fly-in this year. We're working with many coalitions and stakeholder groups to submit these joint appropriation requests, and these detail funding priorities for the year, the NAL, NADPREP, Vaccine Bank, NBAF, the National Wildlife Health Center, right, detailing those priorities. We're also sending letters to Congress on the importance of the programs. And so when you think about the annual appropriation process, it typically culminates in this annual omnibus bill, right? So it has all of the different funding for the federal government for the new fiscal year, which begins on October 1. Well, this year we've had a delayed process because lawmakers ran out of time. So when you're thinking about AVMA GRD and advocacy efforts in terms of timing, this is going to be something that is a topic for the lame duck session. So post-election, when Congress returns, they have to turn their attention to appropriations priorities, and AVMA GRD is very engaged in that to ensure that these priorities in animal health infrastructure, right, have the robust funding and that lawmakers realize how important they are to One Health. One other point on that, and as I just mentioned, in terms of the COVID-19 aspect, this has really been a case study on One Health because the non-laboratories are participating in the COVID-19 response. So many of these veterinary diagnostic labs are leading testing efforts in many states. And so this has been the opportunity, right, for AVMA GRD working with other stakeholders like AVMC and the Association of Veterinary Laboratory Diagnosticians who work at the NALs to demonstrate the importance of One Health and the role that animal health infrastructure plays in public health. And frankly, at this point, it's been really a matter of national preparedness because we remain in this kind of crisis mode. So that's been a really great opportunity for us to highlight the role and the importance of animal health infrastructure. Moving on to research. So our One Health priorities also include research programs at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, as you see listed here, the National Institutes of Health, the Centers for Disease Control, and the U.S. Geological Survey. And that's because that's where the National Wildlife Health Center is housed within. So as I just mentioned, right, AVMA is advocating for these One Health research programs in addition to animal health infrastructure through the annual appropriations process, right? So again, this is really about educating lawmakers on the impact that these research programs have on the nation's ability to predict and prepare for FAD outbreaks. It also ties into antimicrobial resistance, and it's also about advancing animal health and welfare. Utilizing our toolkit, right, I've just talked about that in the past several slides, so we're leveraging congressional champions, we're submitting those joint appropriations requests, we're sending letters to Congress, we're collaborating on all of those activities and lobbying efforts with other stakeholders like AVMC, as I mentioned, and many other coalitions that are specifically focused on federal research programs. So this could be groups that focus on NIH funding, and that could be patient groups as well as universities. And all of this working together, right, through coalitions and this advocacy effort through the appropriations process, it helps to elevate the role of veterinary medicine in One Health. Finally, one other component that I'm going to touch on tonight in terms of a component of the One Health agenda is workforce. So AVMA spends a lot of time advocating for the One Health workforce to ensure the country has the highly skilled and trained veterinarians that are needed at the state, local, federal, and private sector to safeguard the food supply and protect public health. So getting back to my first slide, right, getting lawmakers to make that connection with veterinarians in One Health is really important, and our advocacy on the workforce is so critical to that, so that we're educating lawmakers about the role that veterinarians playing in protecting public health. So in addition to AVMA's priorities in higher ed and federal student aid policy, AVMA GRD advocates for programs like the Public Service Loan Forgiveness, the Veterinary Medicine Loan Repayment Program. And these two provide student loan support, right, to help graduates pursue public health veterinarian roles, and for the latter to practice in USDA designated veterinary shortage areas across the country. So it's a national preparedness need, frankly. Additionally, AVMA is advocating for legislation that would specifically help veterinarians pursue the extra training, whether it's through residencies, internships, or joint PhD programs that ensure we have the One Health workforce, and that's called the Vet Med Act. Finally, one other point about that, just to drive that home, is that the Vet Med Act would pause student loan repayment and interest accumulation for veterinarians when they are pursuing these advanced training programs. The bill is sponsored by our One Health champion and our veterinarian serving in Congress, Congressman Kurt Schrader. And it's in recognition of the need our country faces really for One Health in the years to come. I'll note that, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, but getting back to the can, right, we have an alert right now on the Vet Med Act, and we really need your help. This is to drive co-sponsors for the legislation, and it's certainly something we're going to be active on early next session in the new Congress to get that bill reintroduced, and also to work to get a companion version, so a Senate Vet Med Act as well, and drive that bill so that it advances. And then finally, I'll just mention, I mentioned the VMLRP, but the Vet Med Loan Repayment Program, there's an Enhancement Act, and that is all about us trying to end the withholding tax on the program's awards so that we can do more with the appropriated dollars that this program helps to get public health veterinarians in USDA designated shortage areas. So that's one of those tax bills that has a focus on a key program that really helps advance the One Health workforce, and something that we're very active on. Additionally, there's a can alert on that, so might be something you want to check out as well. So what can you do? How can you get involved? As you know, right, and National One Health Day and Election Day are both November 3rd. So this is a great time to talk about what you can do to take steps to be more involved in advocacy for One Health and the veterinary profession. So the most important thing you can do is vote. And I really hope this presentation has demonstrated that your voice really does matter, right? It impacts federal policy on issues of importance to veterinary men, and because all politics are local, elected officials want to hear from constituents and want to know what's an issue of importance to them. So making sure you're voting and you're participating in the process is really important. Finally, and I think we'll say it 10 more times before this presentation's over, please join the Congressional Advocacy Network, right? This is that action network. It's the best tool we have that allows us to give our members alerts when it would have the most impact for them to weigh in with his or her member of Congress or senator and drive that grassroots advocacy on both One Health, as we talked about, there's a can alert right now, and other topics, especially as we go into a new Congress next year. I really encourage you to get more involved by participating in Advocacy Day events. And again, right, being a constituent and weighing in with your elected official, it really matters, and it helps carry our message and enhance our advocacy that we're doing on behalf of One Health. You can learn about these events and be most informed about what is happening in Washington, D.C. by subscribing to the AVMA Advocate. Also, we have an AVMA CAN, so the Congressional Advocacy Network Facebook page and Twitter feed. We talked a little bit about the AVMA GRD externship, and I hope many of you will consider taking a look at that. More information's on our website. Also, you know, get involved locally. So maybe you should take a look at whether your elected official supports One Health and Vet Med priorities. Do some research and then activate, right? That's the opportunity to call, write, visit. Make it clear that One Health is a priority and how important it is. And then finally, as I discussed before, the AVMA PAC is a critical tool to advance vet med priorities like One Health. I'm going to stop there though, because I think it's now a good time to introduce my colleague, Alex Sands. We'll shake things up a bit. We'll make sure you all are still paying attention and with us. And so Alex, I'm wondering if you can pop on and say hello to the audience, and let's launch our first little interaction.
Hi everyone, nice to see you. Thanks for having me moderate tonight. Lauren, great presentation so far. We thought we'd take a minute just to hear from the audience with a few poll questions. So Valerie, can you get us started with our first poll question? Perfect, hopefully that has loaded on your screen. So we talked a lot about the importance of engaging in these advocacy days, and we want to know how many of you have participated in a previous AVMA or state VMA or student-led advocacy day. So we'll give you all a second to answer. Seeing a lot of responses coming in. Actually, many people on the call tonight have not yet participated in an advocacy day event. I know Lauren's been talking a lot about how important it is to hear from you as local members and, oh, excuse me, the local constituents. So with that question closed, let's go ahead and transition to the next. You've heard a lot about our AVMA Congressional Action Network. And Lauren's mentioned this is really the best way to stay engaged. So while you guys are answering your familiarity and if you're signed up for this, thought I would underscore a point of just how important this is in our advocacy efforts. When the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program was actually on the chopping block in the last Congress, we were able to turn to AVMA's Congressional Advocacy Network and get that alert out the door and activate the community. And we had over 5,000 contacts to Congress, which was pretty significant. And the contacts were made right in advance of a key markup that would have ended the program. In the end, we were successful in beating back that attempt to eliminate the program, and it lived another day. And it was really, I'll say, because of opportunities like the CAN to make your voices heard. So a little disappointing to see the numbers here on this slide, but certainly y'all have plenty of time to head over to avmacan.avma.org and get signed up. And with that, some computer lags. Thank you all for bearing with me on the technology.
You're doing great.
I have one more question for you all before I turn it back to Lauren. Are you a member of AVMA's Packed Coffee Club? Many of you may have heard about this among the AVMA roadshows. Okay. I'm actually seeing, Lauren, not many are familiar or members of the Coffee Club. I'm still giving folks a chance to weigh in, but I think this is a good time to wrap this question up and turn it back to you to pick up with the slides.
Of course. So thanks, Alex, and thanks for participating in the polls. It's nice to see that people are out there and listening to us still, and happy to say a bit more about that, because there are a lot of misconceptions about a PAC and what it actually is and does. So first and foremost, as I stressed throughout this presentation, it's truly a critical tool to helping the GRD with advocacy. Federal law regulates PACs. I'll say it again. Federal law regulates PACs. AVMA and SAVMA members can make a voluntary contribution to the PAC. But federal law, it prevents it from coming from your dues. So keep in mind, this is a separate voluntary contribution, and I can't underscore enough how any and every bit counts. The PAC helps AVMA because it allows us to develop relationships with lawmakers, bipartisan relationships, with the goal to build champions for veterinary medicine. AVMA's PAC is completely bipartisan, and we only focus on issues that are directly related to veterinary medicine. In addition to One Health, which is obviously of top importance, that we're doing a presentation to SAVMA, right? So students really care about this as well as practitioners, but we work on, student debt and issues related to first starting out and running a veterinarian practice or seeking a position as a public health veterinarian. And so, we recognize that students are juggling tight budgets. And that's why the AVMA PAC Coffee Club is such a cool idea. It's one of the best ways for SAVMA members to participate and really have an impact in advocacy for the cost of a Starbucks latte. And I don't know about you, but I'm spending a lot of time at home these days. So the amount of money that was going to Starbucks, I'm banking it. So maybe all of you will reevaluate and think a little bit closely about that. And another word I'll just say about COVID is that I mentioned this earlier through the presentation. I think it's really important to underscore this for all of you, but COVID-19 and the shutdown of Capitol Hill has really demonstrated how important AVMA's PAC is to advocacy. And as I mentioned, right, lobbyists and visitors have not been allowed on Capitol Hill, so we're not having those in-person meetings constantly like we typically are. But the AVMA PAC has allowed us to interface directly with members of Congress and to identify veterinary medicine's priorities and concerns throughout the pandemic. So this is what allowed us to highlight the needs of the NALD, right? I was talking about animal health infrastructure and how, because of COVID-19, the NALD laboratories in many states have been tapped because they have the capacity to do these tests. And in many cases, they're leading the testing efforts because the public health laboratories can't. And so the PAC allowed us to bring that issue directly to members of Congress and to work on advancing funding for the NALD and animal health infrastructure, in addition to many of the other small business and other issues impacting small veterinary practices and food safety and the food supply that we saw throughout the pandemic. So take a look, check out the SAVMA Coffee Club. The link is here. It's also, if you can go on our AVMA PAC website. So that concludes the presentation. I'm going to turn it back over to Alex, and she's going to kick off our questions and discussion.
Thanks, Lauren. So I'm seeing some questions coming in, so just want to take a minute to remind you to submit your questions via the question box. And before we dive in, we have one more poll question we would be remiss if you didn't ask. All right, here we go. I'm sure many of you have seen the record numbers already. I think the last count was 70 million plus already. So want to ask who's voted or has a plan to vote by November 3rd. A lot of responses coming in. Overwhelmingly, the vast majority of you have a plan in place. Give this a few more seconds to shake out here. Very reassuring to see. We're in the closing days here, so the vast majority of you need to do some shaming for those others to make sure that you go. But thank you all so much for participating. Thought that'd be a fun one just to see, given the elections around the corner. But so, Lauren, we have a question that's been coming up a few times in the chat. The folks want to know what happens to the One Health Act with the new Congress, essentially when the bill dies at the end of the year.
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. So first, let me just underscore something we talked a little bit about, right? So it's normal for federal legislation like the One Health Act to take several years and several congressional legislative sessions before it becomes law. And that's because the legislative process is drawn out, right? It's complicated, and there's many twists and turns. And case in point, right, COVID-19 has upended the past 8 months, of federal legislation. So the long process, what we talked about before, it necessitates this kind of constant and continuous advocacy. And so if the One Health Act doesn't pass into law this year and at the end of the 116th Congress, then the GRD, with your help, right, because you're all going to subscribe to the CAN and get more involved in advocacy, we'll work really hard to leverage our congressional champions and our co-sponsors from this Congress and reintroduce the legislation in the new Congress. And that, keeping in mind that we'll have a lot more outreach to do in the new Congress as well, right? Because there will be new members of Congress. So they'll be, just elected. They maybe don't know much about One Health. Conversely, they may know a ton about One Health and want to be champions for us. So it will start with reintroduction of the bill and then jumping right into drive to drive more support, drive more co-sponsors, and utilize some of those activities from our toolkit that I talked a little bit about before, working with coalitions, stakeholders, but certainly you all play a really big role in helping us to advance all of those efforts. And I hope you'll consider, subscribing to the CAN and then keeping an eye out for when we're activating folks to make sure that if it doesn't pass into law by the end of this Congress and the next Congress, we get it introduced early and that we're driving co-sponsors in support of it continuously.
That's great. Thank you, Lauren. I think that's really helpful too. And it's important to highlight all of the progress made on this topic this past year too. So even though Congress is ending and we're starting anew, I think we're even more well positioned entering a new Congress, and you're in good hands with Lauren leading the advocacy portfolio in the GRD. So a couple folks have asked if it was a topic for fly-in, what are barriers to co-sponsorship? Why hasn't the bill sort of had more support already?
Well, as we've been discussing and as I just underscored, it's a slow and complicated process, right? And there's a lot of noise on Capitol Hill, if you all haven't figured that out so far, right? So we're constantly competing, right? And in this really like busy environment of all these other competing priorities. And that's why the process is so slow and complicated, because other things pop up. So I really hope that what you take away from this presentation is to not feel disheartened by the fact that, while it looks like you all have been focusing on this One Health Act, but it hasn't passed into law. It's about building this momentum, developing congressional champions, ensuring that One Health is a topic that lawmakers are thinking about, not only in this piece of legislation, right, to ensure federal coordination, but that they are thinking about One Health in several other aspects. Maybe, they're looking to respond to the next pandemic, which is something, right, Congress will switch into that mode very quickly about mitigation and response. Our goal is to not only highlight the need for coordination at the federal level, but it's also to highlight these other things. And I talked about animal health infrastructure, research, and also the role of veterinary medicine. Frankly, the fact that we are a resource and an expertise when we're thinking about how do we make a robust and well-prepared public health infrastructure. And so, just keep in context that it's part of a larger legislative strategy involving all the other advocacy efforts I described. And it really underscores the importance of getting as many folks to be able to weigh in with their elected officials as possible to make it clear that this is a priority. And that's how we build momentum and get, drive up those co-sponsors in the new Congress.
Thanks, Lauren.
Did I answer that question or should I do more? Remind me if I'm not answering these questions, okay?
I think it was a really great, it was a good answer. And I was actually just going to add, just in terms of some of the logistical challenges, it's been already touched on with Lauren's presentation regarding the bureaucracy, or just, I guess, maybe just talking about the silos of the issues. Unfortunately, sometimes that very much exists on Capitol Hill too, where staffers have an issue box or an issue set, or a member has a space that they're comfortable in, and an issue might come really close or touch in one way, but they might be hesitant in another. So I was just going to add, we find there's a lot of receptivity. It's just, and this is, I think, the importance of using all of the tools in the toolkit, because sometimes that's just what it takes to break through the noise and make sure that your voice is heard. So I'm seeing a slowdown of questions coming in through the question box. I don't know, Ashley, as original moderator, if you want to take a prerogative to ask Lauren any questions.
Excuse me. So we did have one question from a few of my classmates whenever I was first bringing up this webinar. And I guess really, I know you touched on it a little bit, but how has COVID-19 impacted the way that you're able to talk about this to people that aren't involved in science maybe?
Oh, awesome. That's a great question. So as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, I don't want to say great opportunity, because COVID has been a horrible experience for our country and many people have been so negatively impacted by it. However, it's been a teaching moment, right? certainly for One Health, but I think more importantly for the role of veterinary medicine, because not only did we have this excellent case study, right, where our National Animal Health Laboratory Network, those veterinary diagnostic labs are the one that are coming to rescue the public health labs in many of these states. So that's one component, right? And that demonstrates and talks to the piece about how it truly is interconnected, right? We can't put human health over here in a silo and disregard animal health because a crisis occurred. And what happened was that these veterinary diagnosticians and animal health world knew how to deal with this because we're used to dealing with large scale outbreaks, right? And large populations of animals, and having to have high throughput capacity to do this rapid diagnostics and then respond accordingly. And so that's why it's been such an excellent case study. But I think beyond that, when to your point about what's the experience been to communicating with folks that don't have a science background, it's really the fact that when something happens in this country, unfortunately, everyone, and by everyone I mean every single politician and elected official, starts being like, wait, why weren't we prepared? What shouldn't we prepare? This is the United States of America. We should be prepared for that. So that has been really interesting because we're able to bring in the voice of veterinary medicine to those discussions and say, well, not only here's how you can be prepared, but here's where we fit in. And let me explain that it's not just, COVID-19 is today. We've been talking about FAD outbreaks and how they are a threat to public health, for decades on Capitol Hill. And so this has been another demonstration of veterinarians are the experts. They are the research-based, evidence, science-based authority on these topics. And it's really important, especially when there's the opportunity that we're living in a worst case scenario, to use that as a teaching moment for lawmakers who maybe don't know anything about science, have no background in animal health, and wouldn't think of why a veterinarian would even be involved in that. So it's been really impactful. As I mentioned, the GRD has been focused on driving support and urging Congress to provide adequate funding and resources for the animal health infrastructure so that we're not draining our resources, and in the event of an FAD would be left out in the cold. And so that has been a really great opportunity also to communicate with people that are maybe don't have a science background and also don't have an ag background, and provide that connection and explain what One Health is in practice.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I think that really helped clarify like how you can kind of approach it. And then also there was one other question. It was talking about the extension of COVID testing into veterinary diagnostic labs. And they were asking, will that help to accomplish the goal of reaching the annual funding of the NAHLN that was originally promised?
Well, that's a very good question, whoever asked that. And what our job to do as advocates, right, is to be able to go to lawmakers and say, here's what we're seeing, right? You are using this as a resource and for a public health pandemic, right? You're tapping this resource. And so now more than ever, right? We needed it before because we weren't reached our authorized level of $30 million annually through the appropriations process. And we were ringing the alarm that saying, well, if there's an outbreak, we're going to be caught on our butts if we don't have adequate resources to be prepared. And boom, now we have COVID-19. So we're using that to talk to elected officials to say, now's the time. You have to invest because the NALN is diminishing their surge capacity by helping in public health, in the public health pandemic. And we're concerned that something's going to happen in animal ag world and we're going to be, caught off guard. So yes, unfortunately, a disaster scenario, an emergency, typically provides the opportunity and advocacy to make the case for why funding for a particular entity has to be increased, or in this case, we have to meet our authorized level. And so not to delay that point too much, but we were very successful working with other coalitions and stakeholders in getting double funding for all of animal health infrastructure in a House proposed version of a stimulus package for COVID. And then the Senate responded with a piece of legislation that also included that funding. And it would be really tremendous, right, for animal health infrastructure if we could advance that funding. It's really up in the air, right, because politically we're not sure if there'll be the timing of another COVID-19 package, but we certainly are working very, very hard to continue to drive the bipartisan support around the NALN and animal health infrastructure. And we're pointing to the fact that you just made, right? We're helping out in COVID-19 public health pandemic, and now more than ever, funding is critical to ensure that we can safeguard the NALN, respond to an FAD, and address the fact that we're helping out with COVID and we need basically reimbursement for that. So excellent question.
I guess one that sort of builds on the themes of that last question. With Congress so divided and bitter right now, what is the prospect for an issue like One Health and anything being accomplished in the lame duck or in the new year?
So I definitely share the frustrations, right? Things seem pretty bitter right now. We're heading into election next week, and that's how politics get. I think it's really important, and I hope on this call we kind of demonstrated, on this webinar, we demonstrated that politics is not the same as policy. They're not mutually exclusive. They definitely intersect. But what I mean by that is, the One Health Act and our other priorities, animal health infrastructure, research, they're examples of the type of policy that is based in science and fact, right? The One Health Act certainly is, and has gained the support of both sides of the aisle. So this is an example how Republicans and Democrats, despite headlines and what you see in popular media all the time, are actually working together on policy. So there are many examples of bipartisan efforts like this, and I always point to them when someone asks me, like, how can you do your job? Like, DC's terrible. I say, they may not be the marquee issues that grab headlines, but there's a lot of examples of bipartisan policy that's happening. One example I'll flag for this audience is that there was this massive wildlife conservation bill that recently, like within the past several months, passed both the House and the Senate. This is a bill that had bipartisan support, and it included things that we were eager to see, like a chronic wasting disease task force being put together. So I'm giving you that in addition to One Health as an example of the fact that, it may seem bitter in kind of the political world, but in policy world, things are still getting done. And the other piece about this, listening to veterinarians and this feeling that like fact or science is not respected, this is really a call to action to all of you, because ensuring that the voice of veterinary medicine is heard and relied upon, right? Relied upon by lawmakers who are making decisions on policy that impacts veterinary medicine is why we need you all to get involved, right? And so because lawmakers listen to their constituents, right, all politics are local, we have a much better impact. We're more effective when we're providing the fact and the science to lawmakers from their constituents. So your involvement in advocacy efforts are really critical to ensuring that these elected officials are listening to the voice of the veterinary profession. And right, if you're a constituent, there's a lot more weight in that. And so I can't encourage you enough that that's kind of my takeaway for you all as you're kind of hearing the headlines and getting disheartened. Focus on and look at the policy that's advancing, because there's a lot of examples of where people are working together to advance fact and science-based policy.
Thank you, Lauren. Another student has asked, what is your favorite One Health example to share with lawmakers?
Ooh, I'm sorry I'm going to be redundant, but the COVID-19 thing. Okay, we have been so jazzed up, audience, on this, because this has been the time to shine for One Health and the role of veterinary medicine, right? We're constantly talking about there could be this outbreak and we need surveillance and diagnostics and countermeasures, and research is important. And here's why you need veterinarians. They don't just take care of your dog and cat. they're critical to public health. All of those things, right? And now it's the perfect time to really have an impact, because before, a lot of people thought, well, here's what, a lot of people didn't know what we were talking about, right? Because they were not super familiar with One Health or the role of veterinary medicine. We had our circle of champions that were with us in the trenches that were really trying to push this forward. And then you had some people that really never thought about this because they weren't on any committees or had oversight of issues of importance. And then COVID-19 happened. So right now, everyone in Congress is open ears on how do we do better? How do we solve this problem? And so that's my favorite example of One Health, because for someone who's never made the connection that animal health, environmental health, and public health are all connected. Well, let's have a public health pandemic, and then they're really all ears on the fact that, wow, I never made that connection. And how can you help us be better prepared and safeguard against these kind of scenarios moving forward? So I get really jazzed about that. Alex, I don't know if you have another favorite One Health example that you want to share.
No, I think, we've been talking about it a lot just because we're still living through it. Obviously, COVID and the NALM and One Health realities that have presented themselves. I think the other element here is there's obviously there's the policy case to be made, but the other angle from the economic point of view in terms of the investments made in these dollars today prevent us from having to throw billions, across different industries in the middle of a crisis. So, and you know what, maybe, I don't know that we went over this in more detail. I'm sorry, I have some more questions popping up. Sorry for my distraction.
Okay.
So Lauren talked about NALM and the One Health Act for fly-in. We would be remiss if we didn't also highlight we had an educational loan repayment topic as well for our last fly-in. And we are in the planning stages for a fly-in for early 2020. So we have a few questions coming in asking about the advocacy flying coming up. So stay tuned for more information. We're working through the details of that. So certainly more to come, and we encourage you all to engage to the extent you can. And that's the thing about the virtual world. It definitely has presented us, making the silver lining, lemons out of lemonade, some more opportunities to utilize the virtual platforms, and actually had some more FaceTime with members of Congress. And Lauren has mentioned that the tax side, but even on the meeting side and the constituent side, the members are without having to run here, there, everywhere, committee votes, markup, dinners, and all around town, they have a lot more time for virtual FaceTime. So thank you for asking that question and reminding us to highlight Fly-In 2021 coming up. More details soon. Okay, so I think we may have addressed all of the questions in the chat. I'm happy to give it a few more minutes if folks have anything else they want to submit through the chat box. Ashley or Leah, I don't know if you had any closing questions or comments from Lauren.
I do have some closing comments, but if anybody else has any questions that they want to ask, you guys can go ahead and do that now. Otherwise, I can go ahead and do the closing comment.
I am not seeing, oh, sorry, whoa, here we go. It's always good to give it the awkward silence because somebody will speak up. That's what I've learned. Okay, so Lauren, give us 2 to 3 action items for the students as we wrap up here.
I would love to. So the easiest thing that you can do after you log off this, or you can do while I'm still talking, is to please sign up for the Congressional Advocacy Network. I hope we've made the point on today's webinar, right, that is a really critical tool, and it's going to help you activate when we need you to, politically when the timing is going to be most effective, and weigh in on not only the One Health Act, but we talked a little bit about the veterinary workforce pipeline. I mentioned, of course, in addition to One Health, AVMA GRD spends a lot of time working on, higher education and federal student aid policy. That's another piece, right, where it's really critical. Alex made the point, PSLF, when that was on the chopping block, we activated our network, grassroots advocacy, and that has a huge impact. And I know those programs are very important to this audience and to SAVMA members. So, join the CAN. go ahead and get hooked up, subscribe to our AVMA advocate so that you can be up to date with the latest that's happening in Washington, D.C. and activities. And then finally, if you can, really consider the AVMA PAC Coffee Club and see what you can do to help out. Like I said, every bit counts. This is a really critical tool for us. Maybe my fourth action, I know you said 3 things. I really do think that the best way to start sometimes is taking a look at who represents you right now. And so making my point on the taking a look at your elected official, your representative, your senators, are they champions for One Health? And if they're not, you're their constituent. You can make an impact and you can push them to become a champion on One Health and other priorities for veterinary medicine that are important to you. So you can really start by identifying your member and then visiting their website. We also have tools, again, through the Congressional Advocacy Network will help you identify who your member is, right? And so that's one way that you can start looking close to home and seeing if they're being a champion for issues of priority to you. Alex, did I miss any? I don't know if you want to give your 3 of what they can do too.
No, I think you hit the main ones. Thanks, Lauren.
All right. Well, we really thank everybody for coming tonight. We really hope you enjoyed it. And we really want to thank the GRD for taking the time to speak with us. As Lauren mentioned, this year's One Health Day falls on Election Day. And so this is the perfect opportunity to highlight the importance of legislation and advocacy with One Health. And she's given us plenty of examples on how to be proactive for not only our profession, but also One Health. So let's utilize the CAN, the Coffee Club, and all the other advocacy opportunities. And continue supporting it. So thank you guys for coming. Thank you, GRD, and don't forget to vote, guys.
Thanks all.